I have been a history teacher at St. Jude's Preparatory Academy for 15 years. I know the creak of every floorboard in the East Wing, the precise angle at which the afternoon sun hits the dust motes in the library, and the way the radiators hiss like angry snakes when the boiler overworks in January. It is an old building, a Gothic revivalist monstrosity of red brick and gargoyles nestled in the perpetually overcast valley of Blackwood County. We are isolated here, surrounded by miles of dense pine forest that seems to swallow sound. I always found the isolation charming, conducive to study. That was before the Tuesday that never ended, before the lockdown. It began during my fourth period AP European history class. We were discussing the defenestration of Prague. The irony is not lost on me now. The rain had been hammering against the tall, arched windows since dawn, a relentless drumming rhythm that had lulled half the class into a semi-catatonic state. I was mid-sentence, gesturing with a piece of chalk when the PA system crackled. It wasn't the usual feedback whine. It was a wet, tearing sound, like raw meat being pulled apart. Then came the voice of Principal Holloway. But it wasn't his voice. It was his cadence, his vocabulary, but the pitch was wrong, too deep, vibrating with a subterranean resonance that rattled the fillings in my teeth. "Code Obsidian," the voice said. "This is a Code Obsidian. Initiate total lockdown. Ignore all bells. Ignore all knocks. Do not look out the windows. This is not a drill." Code Obsidian. In 15 years of active shooter drills, fire drills, and severe weather protocols, I had never heard of Code Obsidian. The students looked at me, their boredom instantly replaced by a sharp, brittle anxiety. They knew the codes: red for fire, blue for medical, silver for active threat. Obsidian was new. Obsidian sounded final. My training kicked in before my fear did. I dropped the chalk. It shattered on the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the sudden silence of the room. "Lights," I whispered, my voice tight. "Blinds. Corner. Now." They moved with the frantic, hushed efficiency of a generation raised on fear. 24 teenagers, children really, scrambled to the corner of the room furthest from the door and the windows. I rushed to the door, locking it and sliding the magnetic strip over the latch. I turned off the lights. The room plunged into a gray, stormy gloom. I pulled the heavy blackout shades down over the windows, shutting out the rain-streaked view of the courtyard. The last thing I saw before the blinds snapped shut was the sky. It wasn't gray anymore. It was a bruised, sickly purple, and the clouds were moving too fast, boiling like oil in a skillet. I joined the students in the corner. We huddled behind the barricade of desks we had practiced building. The silence that followed was heavy, physical. We waited for the sound of sirens, for the crack of a gunshot, for the reassuring voice of the police. But there was nothing. Only the hum of the ventilation system, which sounded increasingly like heavy, labored breathing. Minutes stretched into an hour. The air in the room grew hot and stagnant. I checked my phone. No signal. "No service" stared back at me in white letters. I looked at the students. Sarah, a bright girl in the front row, was trembling violently. I put a finger to my lips, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. Then the smell hit us. It started faint, the scent of ozone and copper, like a penny held in a sweaty palm. Then it grew stronger, evolving into something rancid, wet dog, sulfur, and something ancient and rot-filled. It was seeping from the hallway, sliding under the gap in the door like an invisible fog. I crawled towards the door, ignoring the silent pleas in the students' eyes. I had to know. There was a small, wire-reinforced window in the door, covered by a piece of black construction paper I kept taped there for privacy. I peeled back the corner of the paper, just a millimeter. The hallway was wrong. The perspective was distorted. The lockers, usually a dull beige, were rusted and peeling, bleeding rivulets of black ichor onto the linoleum. The lights overhead flickered with a stroboscopic intensity, buzzing like trapped hornets. And the hallway itself seemed to stretch on forever, an infinite tunnel of decay. That's when I saw it. At the far end of the corridor, where the science lab should have been, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated and jointed in too many places. It moved with a jerky, stop-motion gait, sliding rather than walking. It had no face, just a smooth, pale surface where features should be. It stopped at a locker, tapped a long, needle-like finger against the metal. Tap, 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 and then moved on. I let the paper fall back. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I crawled back to the students. "Stay down," I mouthed. "Don't make a sound." But the universe has a cruel sense of timing. From the back of the huddle, a low, guttural moan broke the silence. It was Mark. I knew Mark had type 1 diabetes. I looked at his watch. It had been 3 hours. He was pale, sweating profusely, his eyes rolling back. He needed insulin. His kit was in his locker, in the hallway. The dilemma was agonizing. Stay and watch him slip into a coma, or go out there into that nightmare. I looked at the 23 other faces. They were terrified, looking to me for salvation. If Mark started seizing, the noise would draw whatever was out there. I had no choice. I signaled to Sarah to hold Mark's head. I took the heavy metal fire extinguisher from the wall mount. It felt pitifully light. I opened the door. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot. I opened it a crack, slipping into the hallway and pulling it shut behind me, engaging the lock from the outside so they would be safe even if I didn't come back. The hallway was freezing. The air tasted of ash. I began to move, hugging the wall. The silence here was different. It was full of whispers. Not auditory whispers, but psychic ones. Thoughts pushing into my skull that weren't mine. Give up, lie down, become the masonry. I shook my head, focusing on the locker numbers. 304, 306. Mark's was 312. As I passed the water fountain, I saw the water wasn't water. It was a thick, viscous red sludge, pulsing rhythmically as it drained. I reached locker 312. My hands shook as I dialed the combination. Left 24, right 10, left... Nothing. The dial wouldn't turn. The metal was cold, burning my fingertips. I smashed the padlock with the base of the fire extinguisher. 1 blow, 2. The noise was deafening in the quiet. The lock shattered. I ripped the door open. The locker was empty, save for the insulin kit, and a heart. A human heart, still beating, suspended in the air by fine red threads attached to the metal walls of the locker. I grabbed the kit, my knuckles brushing the wet, pulsing organ. I gagged, stumbling back. That's when the lights went out completely. Total, suffocating darkness. I fumbled for the small tactical flashlight on my keychain. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating swirling dust that looked like microscopic faces screaming. I turned back towards my classroom, but the classroom wasn't there. The door to room 302 was gone. In its place was a solid brick wall. The geography of the school had shifted. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced my chest. I was trapped in the hallway. I heard the tap, tap, tap again. Closer now, behind me. I ran. I didn't care about the noise anymore. I sprinted down the corridor, the beam of my light bouncing wildly. I turned the corner towards the main stairwell, intending to go down to the administrative offices, hoping to find a landline, a weapon, anything. The stairwell was a vertigo-inducing spiral. Looking down, I couldn't see the bottom floor, just a descending coil of stairs disappearing into a red mist. I ran down, flight after flight, first floor, ground floor, basement, sub-basement? St. Jude's didn't have a sub-basement. I stopped on a landing that shouldn't exist. A heavy iron door stood ajar, a sickly yellow light spilling from within. I heard typing. furious, manic typing. I pushed the door open. It was the principal's office, but twisted. The desk was enormous, made of bone. Behind it sat Principal Holloway, or what was left of him. He was fused to his chair, his skin waxy and melted, merging with the leather. His fingers were flying across a typewriter that had no paper, just hammering the keys. He looked up. His eyes were gone, replaced by two hollow pits of blackness. "The curriculum has changed, Mr. Thorne," he gurgled, black bile spilling from his lips. "We are teaching suffering today." I backed away, raising the extinguisher. "Where are the police? What is this?" "The bell won't ring," Holloway laughed, a wet hacking sound. "Class is eternal." Suddenly, the monitors on the wall, the CCTV feed, flared to life. I saw my classroom. The students were still there, huddled, but in the corner of the room, on the ceiling, something was forming. A stain, spreading like mold. It was a face, a massive, stretching face pressing through the plaster. They didn't see it. I had to get back. I bolted from the office, back to the impossible stairwell. But I couldn't go up. The stairs going up were gone, replaced by a smooth vertical shaft. I had to go through the gym. The double doors to the gymnasium were ahead. I burst through them. The gym was a cavernous void. The floor was water, dark, stagnant water. The bleachers rose up into the darkness like cliffs. Floating in the center of the flooded court were the varsity team. They were suspended in the air, motionless, trapped in amber-like spheres. And below them in the water, things swam, long serpentine shapes that rippled the surface. I waded into the water. It was freezing, numbing my legs instantly. I had to cross to the other side, to the fire exit that led back to the east wing. I held the insulin kit above my head. Something brushed my leg, rough like sandpaper. I didn't look down. I focused on the exit sign, glowing like a holy beacon. I reached the other side, hauling myself up onto the stage. The curtains parted slightly. Standing there was the drama teacher, Mrs. Gable. She was wearing a tragedy mask. She didn't move. "Mrs. Gable?" I whispered. The mask fell away. There was nothing behind it, just neck muscles and vertebrae. She collapsed into a pile of dust. I scrambled through the backstage corridors, navigating a maze of old props and costumes that seemed to reach out for me. I burst out into the East Wing hallway. It was back. The door to 302 was there. But standing in front of it was the creature I had seen earlier, the tall man. It was hunched over, its needle finger tracing the frame of the door. It sensed me. Its head snapped 180 degrees. No face, just smoothness. It screeched, a sound like grinding metal, and charged. I didn't think. I pulled the pin on the fire extinguisher and squeezed the handle. A cloud of white chemical powder exploded outward, blinding the creature. It recoiled, thrashing. I used the confusion to tackle it. No, that was suicide. I used the distraction to throw the heavy canister at its legs. It buckled with a sickening crunch of dry wood. I lunged at the door. "Open up! It's Mr. Thorne!" I screamed. The door clicked. Sarah opened it. I fell inside, scrambling to lock it again. The creature slammed against the wood. Once, twice. The door groaned, the wood splintering. "Mark!" I yelled, sliding across the floor to the huddled boy. He was convulsing. I tore open the kit, prepped the needle, and injected him. The class watched in horrified silence as the pounding on the door grew rhythmic. Boom, boom, boom. "Mr. Thorne, look," Sarah whispered, pointing to the window. The blinds were twitching. A hand, pale and elongated, was sliding under the sash, trying to lift the blinds. Then another hand from the ceiling vent. They were coming in. The room was shrinking. The walls were breathing. The map of Europe on the wall was bleeding red ink. "Desks!" I roared. "Reinforce the door. Everyone, grab something heavy." We piled desks, chairs, books against the door. The wood began to crack. A long gray arm punched through the paneling, groping blindly. I grabbed a chair leg and smashed the limb. It dissolved into black smoke, but more were coming. The
The ceiling tiles began to rain down. We retreated to the center of the room. I stood in front of them, a broken chair leg in my hand, ready to die for these kids. The darkness swallowed the edges of the room. The entity breached the barricade. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. And then, light. Blinding, searing white light. A flashbang grenade detonated, deafening us. Men in black tactical gear swarmed the room, their movements fast, precise, violent. They weren't fighting monsters. They were shouting commands, clearing the room. "Clear, we have hostages secured." One of them grabbed me, dragging me out. The hallway was normal, just a hallway. No blood, no rust. The lights were bright fluorescent. I looked back. The monsters were gone. The wreckage of the door was there, but it looked like it had been battered by a ram, not a demon. We were ushered outside, into the cool, damp air. The rain had stopped. Parents were weeping. Police cars filled the lot. They told us it was a disgruntled former student with a sledgehammer and a homemade hallucinogenic gas released into the ventilation. That was the official story. Mass hallucination, hysteria. But I know the truth. As I sat in the back of the ambulance, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, I looked back at the school. St. Jude's loomed against the night sky, silent and imposing. And there, in the window of room 302, on the 3rd floor, I saw it, the silhouette, the tall man. He waved a long, needle-like finger. Tap, tap, tap. I looked down at my hand. I was still clutching the insulin kit. It was covered in a black tar-like substance that smelled of ozone and rot. I wiped it on the blanket, but the stain remained. The bell never rang to dismiss us. I fear part of us is still in there, sitting in the dark, waiting for the lesson to end.
They tell you about the procedures. They give you the handbook. Run, hide, fight. They drill it into us during those professional development days where we sit in the library, drinking lukewarm coffee, joking about how we defend our classrooms with staplers and heavy textbooks. It's all hypothetical. It's all a dark fantasy we indulge in to pretend we have control. But when the PA system crackled to life at 10:14 a.m. on a Tuesday in November, the fantasy dissolved into a gray, suffocating reality that I still can't scrub from the inside of my eyelids. I'm Mr. Thorne. I teach, or used to teach, AP European History at Oak Haven High. It was a miserable day outside. The kind of relentless drumming rain that turns the sky the color of a bruised plum and makes the fluorescent lights inside hum with a headache-inducing frequency. We were discussing the Congress of Vienna. The kids were barely awake. I remember looking at Sarah Miller in the second row. She was sketching in the margins of her notebook. I remember David Chen tapping his pen against his desk, a rhythmic click, click, click that was slowly driving me insane. Then came the voice. It wasn't the principal, Dr. Eris. It wasn't the bubbly secretary, Mrs. Gable. It was a voice I didn't recognize. A flat, synthetic rasp that sounded like it was being spoken through a mouthful of gravel. Code red. This is not a drill. Lockdown. 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 The silence that followed was heavy, physical. It slammed into the room like a pressure wave. For a second, nobody moved. We were frozen in that evolutionary gap between disbelief and panic. Then, training kicked in. I locked the door. I turned off the lights. I ushered 23 teenagers into the corner of the room, behind my heavy oak desk and the file cabinets, away from the sight line of the door window. We became a huddled mass of denim and anxiety. The first hour was standard. We waited for the sound of sirens, the shout of police, or, God forbid, the pop of gunfire. But there was nothing, just the rain lashing against the windows and the aggressive hum of the ventilation system. The silence began to curdle. It wasn't empty, it was pregnant with something malicious. By 11:30 a.m., the air in the room had grown hot and stale.
The smell of teenage sweat and floor wax was becoming nauseating. I checked my phone. No signal. "I have no bars," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Why is there no service?" "The storm," I lied. "Just stay quiet." At 12 p.m., the light coming through the blinds changed. It didn't dim as if the sun were setting, it shifted spectrums. The gray light turned into a sickly, jaundiced yellow. It filtered through the slates, casting striped shadows across the students' faces that looked like prison bars. That's when the sounds started. It wasn't footsteps. It was a wet, sliding sound coming from the hallway, like a heavy trash bag filled with soup being dragged across the linoleum. Slosh, drag, slosh, drag. I held a finger to my lips, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The sound stopped right outside my door. We all held our breath. I saw David's eyes widen, fixed on the small rectangular window in the door. I had covered it with a piece of black construction paper years ago, a permanent fixture, but the paper had curled at the corner, leaving a tiny sliver of visibility. Something was pressing against the glass. It wasn't a face. It looked like raw meat, pink, glistening, and pulsing. It pressed hard, smearing against the reinforced glass, testing the strength of the barrier. Then a voice came from the other side, but not from a mouth. It sounded like it was vibrating through the door itself. "Mr. Thorne, open the door. The Congress of Vienna, we need to discuss the borders." It was my voice, perfect mimicry, but stripped of all emotion. A recording played back on a degrading tape. The students stared at me in horror. I gripped the pair of heavy-duty scissors I had grabbed from my desk so hard my knuckles turned white. "Don't answer," I mouthed. The thing at the door let out a sound of frustration, a high-pitched tea kettle shriek that shattered the glass of the clock on the wall. Then the wet sliding sound resumed, moving away down the hall. We sat there for what felt like hours. The yellow light outside deepened into a bruised purple. Time had lost its meaning. My watch had stopped moving at 12:15. I realized then that we weren't just in a lockdown. We were in a quarantine of reality. Around the 4th hour, subjective time, the room started to change. I looked at the whiteboard where I had written the homework assignment. The alphabets were rearranging themselves. Read Chapter 4 slowly morphed into Feed the Walls. The ink ran down the board like black blood. "Mr. Thorne," whispered an Emily, "look at the floor." The linoleum tiles were breathing. They rose and fell with a subtle rhythmic heave. The grout lines were widening, revealing a pulsating red tissue beneath. The school was waking up. It was biological. I knew we couldn't stay. If the room was digesting us, staying meant death. I made a decision that goes against every protocol I've ever learned. "We have to move," I whispered. "We're going to the library. It has the emergency exit to the parking lot." "We're not supposed to open the door," David hissed. "Look at the walls, David," I pointed. The cinder blocks were sweating, a clear, viscous fluid. The smell of copper and rot was overwhelming. I moved to the door. I listened. Silence. I unlocked it. The click sounded like a gunshot and pushed it open. The hallway was not the hallway. It was an intestine. The lockers were still there, but they were warped, bulging outwards as if stuffed with soft matter. The metal was warm to the touch. The ceiling tiles were gone, replaced by a canopy of dangling wires and ductwork that writhed like snakes in the draft. The hallway stretched out infinitely in both directions, far longer than the school building actually was. "Single file. Hold hands. Don't let go," I ordered. We moved into the corridor. The air was freezing, despite the warm walls. We passed Mrs. Gable's office. The door was open. I glanced inside and immediately wished I hadn't. The room was filled with phones, hundreds of them, piled to the ceiling, all vibrating, all ringing silently. And in the center, sitting in the chair, was a scarecrow made of staplers and rulers, wearing Mrs. Gable's cardigan. We kept moving. We reached the intersection near the cafeteria. The smell of food was strong, but it was wrong. It smelled like a Sunday roast left in the sun for a week. The double doors to the cafeteria were chained shut from the inside. Suddenly, the lights overhead flared, an aggressive, strobing magnesium white. "Run!" I yelled. We sprinted. The hallway seemed to stretch as we ran, the physics of the space rubber banding. I heard a scream behind me. I turned. Sarah had let go of the chain. She was standing by a bank of lockers. One of the lockers had opened, not a metal door swinging out, but a vertical slit opening like an eye. A fleshy appendage, like a tongue made of locker metal, had wrapped around her waist.
"Mr. Thorne," she screamed. I lunged for her, slashing with the scissors. I struck the appendage. It didn't clang, it squelched. A spray of black oil hit my face. The locker shrieked, a sound of grinding gears and human pain. It recoiled, dropping Sarah. I grabbed her by the collar and hauled her forward. We crashed through the doors of the library. I slammed them shut and jammed a chair under the handle. The library was massive, a cathedral of silence. The shelves towered 30 feet high, far higher than the ceiling should allow. Dust motes danced in the shafts of purple light coming from the high windows. But the books were all blank. I pulled one off the shelf. History of the World. Blank pages. All of them. "Where are the others?" David asked, counting heads. "We're missing 3. I felt a cold pit in my stomach. In the sprint, in the chaos, we had lost 3 students. I didn't even know who. The guilt hit me harder than the smell. "We keep moving," I said, my voice hollow. "Emergency exit is in the back." We navigated the labyrinth of shelves. It was a maze. I recognized the Dewey Decimal placards, but the numbers were wrong. 666, suffering. 000, the void. 999, the end. As we reached the back of the library, we found the emergency exit, but it was bricked over. Not with fresh brick, but with old moss-covered stone that looked like it had been there for centuries. Scratched into the stone were words, "Class is in session forever." Oh God, Emily began to hyperventilate. Then the PA system crackled again. "Mr. Thorne, you are wandering in the halls without a pass. Detention is mandatory." The floor of the library shook. The bookshelves began to topple, falling like dominoes, crashing towards us in a wave of paper and wood. "To the media center, now!" I pointed to the glass-walled room in the center of the library. We scrambled inside just as the shelves collapsed around us, burying the glass room in a mountain of erased history. We were trapped in a fishbowl, buried under the weight of erased history. Inside the media center, the computers were on. All 30 screens displayed the same image, a live feed of the boiler room. In the center of the boiler room, standing next to the furnace, was me. A doppelganger. It looked exactly like me, but its eyes were black voids and its mouth hung open at an impossible angle. It was looking up at the camera, waving. That's you," Sarah whispered. "No," I said, gripping the scissors. "That's the thing running the school." We had to go down. The logic of nightmares dictates that the only way out is through the heart of the monster. The media center had a ventilation shaft. I kicked the grate open. "It's tight, but it leads to the maintenance tunnels. We can get to the boiler room from there. Kill the head, the body dies." It was a desperate theory, born of too many movies, but it was all I had. Crawling through the vents was a claustrophobic hell. The metal was slick with condensation. We could hear things scurrying in the parallel shafts, clicking sounds like giant beetles. I was in the lead. I saw a grate ahead looking down into the science wing. I paused and looked down. The science wing was flooded. The water was waist-deep and dark. Floating in the water were the giant preserved specimens from the biology closets, sharks, fetal pigs, tapeworms. But they had grown. They were swimming, and standing on the lab tables were students, stranded while things circled in the water below. I couldn't help them. I had to keep moving. I bit my lip until it bled to keep from screaming. We dropped out of the vents into the sub-basement. It was hot down here. The heat was oppressive, smelling of sulfur and burnt hair. The hum of the school's heart was deafening. We walked past the janitorial supplies. The mops were standing upright on their own, swaying to a silent song. We reached the boiler room. The heavy iron door was hot to the touch. I looked at the students. There were only 6 left. The vents had taken the rest. I didn't know how or when. They had just faded away in the darkness. "Stay here," I ordered. "If I don't come back in 2 minutes, run. Just run blindly. Don't stop." I pushed the door open. The boiler room was a cavern. The furnace was a massive gaping maw of iron and fire, roaring with an unnatural intensity. And standing there was the knot Thorn. It turned to face me. Its movements were jerky, stop motion. "The class hasn't rung," it said. Its voice was the PA system. "Class is dismissed," I yelled, rushing it. It didn't fight back. It just smiled, its mouth tearing wider at the corners. As I plunged the scissors into its chest, I didn't hit flesh. I hit dry leaves. The creature exploded into a cloud of dry, crumbling paper and dust. The furnace roared. The fire turned green. The walls of the boiler room began to scream, a chorus of 1,000 voices. The illusion was breaking. The structural integrity of the nightmare was collapsing. I ran back to the students. "Go! Up the stairs! The fire exit!" The stairs were twisting, spiraling like a corkscrew. We climbed. The concrete turned to mud, then to flesh, then back to concrete. The roar behind us was consuming everything. I saw the darkness swallowing the bottom of the stairs, eating the world. We burst through the double doors at the top of the landing. Cold air. Rain. Real rain. We tumbled out on the wet asphalt of the faculty parking lot. The storm was still raging, but it was a normal storm. The sky was gray, not purple. Police cars were everywhere. Blue and red lights flashed, blinding us. SWAT teams were shouting, weapons raised. "Get down, hands in the air." We collapsed on the pavement, sobbing. I looked back at the school. It looked normal, just a brick building in the rain. No breathing walls, no infinite hallways. They told us later it was a gas leak, mass hallucination caused by carbon monoxide and hysteria. They said the students we lost had run off into the woods in a panic and got lost or succumbed to the fumes in hidden corners. But I know. I know because when they did the head count, they found everyone. Everyone except the students who vanished in the vents. They're still listed as missing. And I know because sometimes when I'm grading papers late at night in my new job, I'll hear that wet sliding sound in the hallway. I'll look at the clock and the hands will be frozen. And on the back of my neck, I'll feel the hot, stale breath of the school, waiting for the bell to ring. I never believed in the supernatural. I was a man of history, of dates and hard facts, the kind of teacher who grounded his students in the tangible reality of the past so they wouldn't get lost in the clouds of the future. But what happened at St. Jude's Academy on November 14th wasn't history. It wasn't science. And it certainly wasn't a drill. St. Jude's was one of those monolithic boarding schools in upstate New York, a Gothic revivalist nightmare of red brick and gargoyles perched on a cliff overlooking a valley that spent 6 months of the year buried in snow. I taught AP European History in room 304, a corner classroom on the 3rd floor. It was a Tuesday. I remember that clearly because Tuesday was the day the cafeteria served that unrecognizable meatloaf, and the smell of it usually wafted up through the vents by 4th period. But that day, the air smelled different. It smelled like ozone and wet copper. The snow had started falling around dawn, thick, heavy flakes that stuck to the tall, arched windows, turning the view outside into a blinding wall of white. By 1 p.m., the blizzard was howling, rattling the panes in their lead frames. My students, 16 seniors with varying degrees of senioritis, were barely listening to my lecture on the Congress of Vienna. I didn't blame them. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, pressurized, like the air before a lightning strike. Then, the PA system crackled. Usually the intercom began with a high-pitched chime. This time, it was just a burst of static, followed by a sound that made my teeth ache. A wet, sucking noise, like a boot being pulled out of deep mud. Then, Principal Holloway's voice came through. But it was wrong. It was too slow.
the pitch shifting up and down like a warped vinyl record. Code red. These shepherds are sleeping. Lockdown. This is not a drill. Code red. The static cut out with a violent pop. For a second, nobody moved. We had practiced this. We knew the drill. Lights off, blinds down, door locked, hide in the corner away from the sightline of the door. But the phrase, "the shepherds are sleeping," that wasn't in the handbook. The code for an active shooter was bluebird. The code for a weather emergency was gray sky. I had never heard "the shepherds are sleeping." "Mr. Thorne?" Sarah Jenkins asked, her voice trembling. She was sitting in the front row, her face pale. "Move," I whispered, snapping into action, just like we practiced, quietly, now. I rushed to the door. The hallway was empty, bathed in the sickly yellow light of the old fluorescent tubes. I locked it, slid the heavy magnetic strip over the latch, and covered the small window with the black construction paper flap we kept velcroed above it. When I turned back, the room was already dark, save for the gray, diffused light filtering through the snow-covered windows. The students were huddled in the back corner behind my desk and the file cabinets. I joined them, sliding down the wall to sit on the cold linoleum. I put a finger to my lips. We waited. In a normal lockdown, you hear things. You hear the distant slam of doors, the squawk of radios, the heavy boots of the resource officer jogging down the hall. But St. Jude's had fallen into a silence so profound it felt physical. The wind outside had stopped. The heating vents had stopped. Even the ambient electrical buzz of the building seemed to have died. We sat there for 20 minutes, then 40. My leg was cramping, but I didn't dare move. I checked my phone to text the faculty group chat. No service. I looked at the students. They were checking theirs too, shaking heads. No Wi-Fi, no LTE. We were in a dead zone. It was an hour in when we heard the first sound from the hallway. It wasn't footsteps. It was a dragging sound. Shh, thump. Shh, thump. Something heavy and wet was moving down the corridor. It sounded like a soaking wet carpet being pulled over the tiles. It stopped right outside our door. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I could see the shadow of feet under the crack of the door, but the shadow was wrong. It didn't look like two shoes. It looked like a long, pooling mass that spread out, blocking the light from the hallway entirely. The door handle jiggled, gently at first, then violently. Click, clack, clack, clack. The lock held. The students were gripping each other's hands, tears streaming silently down their faces. Sarah buried her head in her knees. Then a voice came from the other side of the door. It wasn't shouting. It was whispering right up against the wood. "Mr. Thorne, open the door. I forgot my skin." It sounded like Leo, a student from my second period, but the cadence was robotic, devoid of inflection. "Mr. Thorne, please, it's cold out here without the rest of me." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter storm. I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. The door handle rattled again, so hard I thought the screws would shear off. Then abruptly, the shadow under the door retracted. The dragging sound resumed, moving away, down towards the science wing. We didn't move for another 2 hours. The light in the room was fading as the afternoon wore on, the gray turning to a bruised purple. "I have to pee," whispered a boy named Mark. "Hold it," I hissed. "I can't." We were trapped. But as the sun set, the temperature in the room plummeted. We could see our breath. The school's heating was definitely off. If we stayed here all night, we might freeze. But going out there... Suddenly a scream shattered the silence. It was high, piercing, and cut short by a wet crunching noise. It came from room 302, Mrs. Holloway's English class, next door. The scream was followed by a sound I can only describe as 1,000 marbles being dropped on the floor, skittering and rolling. Then silence again. I knew we couldn't stay. Whatever was out there had breached the room next door. I crawled to the window and peered through the blinds. What I saw made my brain reel. There was no ground. The school was floating. Outside the window, where the courtyard should have been, there was just a swirling vortex of gray mist and snow. The brick wall of the school extended downwards into infinity. We weren't in upstate New York anymore. We were nowhere. I turned back to the students. "We have to move," I whispered. "We need to get to the stairwell. The basement is a fallout shelter. Thick doors, supplies." "But the door," Sarah whimpered. "I'll go first." I grabbed a heavy brass globe stand from my desk, wielding it like a mace. I approached the door, my hand trembling as I unlocked the latch. I opened it an inch. The hallway was unrecognizable. The lockers were breathing. The metal doors expanded and contracted rhythmically, covered in a membrane of rust that looked like dried blood. The floor was covered in a black, viscous sludge. The lights overhead were flickering with a strobe-like intensity. "Stay close," I commanded. We stepped out. The air smelled of sulfur and rotting meat. We moved towards the stairwell, hugging the wall. Room 302's door was wide open. I made the mistake of looking inside.
The desks were piled in a chaotic heap in the center of the room, and fused to the ceiling in a perfect circle were the students. They weren't hanging, they were embedded in the plaster, their faces peaceful, eyes closed, their bodies merging with the building materials. Mrs. Halloway was in the center, her mouth open in a silent scream, her arms replaced by the fluorescent light fixtures. I gagged, pushing Mark forward. "Don't look, just move." We reached the stairwell, but the stairs didn't go down. They went up, both ways. I looked over the railing. The stairwell was an Escher painting come to life. Flights of stairs spiraled into an infinite abyss below and an infinite rise above. Gravity felt slippery here. "This isn't real," Sarah sobbed. "I'm dreaming. Wake up." "We go down," I said, though down was a relative term now. "Follow the railing." We descended for what felt like miles. We passed the second floor, then the first, but the numbers on the doors kept changing. Floor 1, floor 0, floor -1, floor -5. At floor -9, the door to the gymnasium burst open. A wind howled out, sucking at us. I grabbed the railing with one hand and Sarah with the other. Inside the gym, the bleachers were filled. Hundreds of figures sat there. They were mannequins, made of the same red clay as the school bricks, but they were wearing the school uniforms. They sat in perfect silence, staring at center court. In the center of the court, a massive pulsating heart, actual biological tissue, size of a Volkswagen, was suspended by chains from the rafters. It beat with a thundering boom that shook the floorboards. Thump, 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 thump. We scrambled past, the suction of the room trying to pull us in to join the silent audience. We made it to the next flight of stairs and collapsed. We were exhausted, dehydrated. The terror was a physical weight. "Mr. Thorne," Mark whispered, "where is Jason?" I did a head count. 15. Jason was gone. "He was right behind me," a girl named Emily said, her eyes wide. He touched the wall. The wall was soft. It just absorbed him." I looked at the wall next to us. The concrete block had a faint outline of a handprint, slightly raised, as if someone was pushing from the inside. "Don't touch anything," I said, my voice cracking. "Walk in the center of the stairs." We continued. Finally, we reached a heavy steel door labeled Boiler Room, Maintenance. This was it, the shelter. I pushed the bar. The door groaned open. We weren't in a boiler room. We were in the principal's office. But it was vast. The walls were lined with thousands of intercom speakers, all different sizes, all buzzing with low static. In the center of the room sat a massive mahogany desk. Behind it sat Principal Halloway, or something wearing his skin. The creature was huge, its suit splitting at the seams to reveal gray, wet flesh underneath. Its face was a smooth, featureless oval, save for a single vertical mouth that ran from forehead to chin. It stood up. The speakers on the walls all spoke in unison. "The lesson is not over, Mr. Thorne." The voice hit us like a shockwave. Students fell to their knees, clutching their ears. Blood ran from my nose. "You are out of your assigned seats." The creature raised a hand, and its fingers elongated into whip-like tendrils. It lashed out, wrapping around Mark's ankle. "No!" I screamed. I charged the desk. I didn't have a plan. I just had the brass globe stand still clutched in my hand. The creature swatted at me, but I slid under the desk. I saw cables, thick, pulsing, fleshy cables running from the creature's legs into the floor. I swung the brass base with every ounce of hysterical strength I possessed. Crunch! The brass bit into the flesh cable. The creature shrieked, a sound of digital feedback and animal pain. The room strobed violently. The walls of speakers began to explode, sparks raining down. "Run!" I yelled to the kids. "The window! Behind the desk!" There was a window there, blocked by heavy velvet curtains. I tore them down. Behind the glass was not the gray vortex, but the white, blinding storm of the real world. Mark and Sarah grabbed a heavy bust of Julius Caesar from the shelf and hurled it through the glass. The cold wind that rushed in was the most beautiful thing I had ever felt. "Jump!" I commanded. "It's the first floor. It's just snow." The students scrambled through the broken pane. The creature was flailing, its connection to the room severed, dissolving into a pile of black sludge and static. As the last student, Emily, climbed out, I looked back. The room was melting. The walls were dripping like wax. The speakers were screaming in human voices. I dove through the window. I landed in 4 feet of snow. The cold was biting, immediate and real. We were in the faculty parking lot. The blizzard was raging, but it was a natural storm. I could see the flashing lights of police cruisers at the main gate, struggling to get through the drifts. We ran. We ran until our lungs burned, wading through the drifts toward the lights. When the SWAT team found us, we were huddled by the gate, half frozen. They asked us what happened. They asked about the shooters. We told them. We told them everything. They didn't believe us. The official report said it was a mass hallucination caused by a gas leak, carbon monoxide poisoning combined with extreme stress from the lockdown and the storm. They said Jason had run off into the woods and froze to death. They found his body 3 days later, half buried. They said the vandalism in the school, the melted walls, the destroyed office was done by us in our delirium. But I know the truth. I was fired, of course, deemed mentally unfit to teach. I spend my days now in a small apartment with the lights always on. Sometimes, when it's very quiet, I can hear it, not from the hallway, but from the walls themselves. A faint scratching, a wet thud. And every time my phone buzzes with an Amber Alert or a weather warning, I don't look at it. I'm terrified that one day I'll pick it up and I won't see a text message. I'll see a gray screen and I'll hear that voice. "The shepherds are sleeping, Mr. Thorne. Class is back in session." The snow had been falling since first period. Fat, wet flakes that plastered themselves against the reinforced glass of room 302 like moths seeking heat. By fifth period, St. Jude's Academy was less a high school and more a concrete island floating in a white void. My voice droned on about the Treaty of Versailles, a dry recitation of history that I knew wasn't penetrating the glazed eyes of the 25 sophomores in front of me. The heater clanked, a dying metallic rhythm that usually lulled me into a stupor. Today, though, it sounded like a warning bell. Then, the PA system crackled, not the usual static hiss that preceded the morning announcements or the lunch menu. This was a wet, tearing sound, like raw meat being pulled apart next to a microphone. The class went silent. We all looked up at the speaker box caged in wire mesh above the whiteboard. "Code Obsidian," a voice whispered. It wasn't Principal Henderson. It sounded like Henderson's voice recorded on a degrading tape loop played back at half speed. "This is not a drill. Lockdown. Code Obsidian. Do not let them in." The silence that followed was absolute. Code Red was an intruder. Code Blue was a bomb threat. Code Green was weather. There was no Code Obsidian in the handbook hanging by the door. I looked at Sarah Jenkins in the front row. Her face had drained of color, reflecting the sudden primal fear that had seized us all. I moved on autopilot. Teacher training took over, suppressing the rising bile in my throat. I crossed the room in 3 strides, slammed the heavy oak door, and turned the deadbolt. It clicked with a finality that felt like a coffin lid closing. "Lights," I ordered, my voice sounding far into my own ears. Mark, the class clown, didn't crack a joke. He flipped the switch. The room plunged into a gray gloom, illuminated only by the spectral white light filtering through the blizzard outside. Away from the door, into the corner, now, not a sound. We huddled in the blind spot, a tangle of denim and fear behind the teacher's desk. The minutes stretched into hours. The only sound was the wind howling against the brickwork, a lonely, desperate sound. Then, the screaming started. It didn't come from the hallway. It came from the vents. It wasn't human screaming. It was a cacophony of voices, students, teachers, parents, all overlapping, screaming different words, mimicking pleas for help, but lacking the cadence of breath. It was a digital wall of sound projected through organic throats. I crawled to the door, peering through the narrow, reinforced window. The hallway was bathed in the emergency red strobe lights, pulsing like a heartbeat. But the geometry was wrong. The lockers were breathing. The metal vented slats expanded and contracted. And standing in the middle of the hall was the vice principal, Mr. Garris. He was facing away from me. I was about to tap on the glass to signal him when his head rotated. Not turned, rotated, a full 180 degrees until his chin was resting on his spine. But there was no face, just a smooth, pale surface of skin where eyes and a mouth should be. Then a vertical slit opened in the center of that blank canvas, and the screaming from the vents grew louder. I recoiled, scrambling back to the students. "Don't look," I hissed, pressing a trembling finger to my lips. "Do not look, whatever you hear." Something slammed against the door, heavy, wet. The wood groaned. The students whimpered, a collective intake of breath. The handle jiggled violently, not with the dexterity of a hand, but as if something was mashing itself against the latch, trying to force entry through brute friction. Then came the voice. It was my voice. Perfect pitch, perfect timbre. "Open up, kids. It's Mr. Thorne. I forgot my keys. Let me in." I stared at the students. They stared at me, then at the door, eyes wide with a terror that transcended understanding. I was right here, but the thing outside sounded exactly like me. It began to bang a rhythm. Shave and a haircut. Knock, 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 knock. "Open the door." The voice glitch shifted, dropping an octave into a demonic bass before snapping back to my tenor. "I have treats." We held our breath for 20 minutes until the presence shuffled away, the sound of wet footsteps receding down the hall. I knew we couldn't stay. The room felt like it was shrinking, the walls pressing in. The air smelled of ozone and copper, blood and electricity. I checked the hallway again. Empty. The lockers had stopped breathing, but a thick black ichor was leaking from the vents, pooling on the linoleum. "We move," I whispered. "The library. It has the heavy maglock doors. We go now." Leaving the classroom felt like stepping on the surface of an alien planet. The school I had worked in for 10 years was gone. The hallway stretched out infinitely, the perspective distorted. Doors to other classrooms were open, revealing darkness that absorbed the red emergency light. We moved in a tight phalanx, me in the lead, wielding a heavy metal fire extinguisher, the students clutching textbooks and scissors as makeshift weapons. We passed the biology lab. The glass wall was shattered. Inside, the specimens, frogs, pigs, the cap cadavers, were gone from their jars. A trail of formaldehyde and slime led out of the room and up the wall, disappearing into a shattered ceiling tile. A soft, wet chewing sound echoed from the darkness above. We reached the stairwell. The steps descended into a black abyss. The bottom floor was flooded with a black liquid that mirrored the red lights, looking like a lake of oil. We had to go up. The library was on the second floor. As we climbed, I looked over the railing. Floating in the black water below were the custodians. They were fused together, a sculpture of limbs and janitorial gray uniforms rotating slowly in the sludge.
We burst into the library. "Barricade!" I shouted. We shoved the heavy circulation desk against the double doors. The library was vast, a cathedral of books. The silence here was heavy, oppressive. We huddled in the reference section. I did a head count. 24. We lost one. I hadn't even heard it happen. Mark was gone. Suddenly, the intercom sparked to life again. "Mark is with us now," the voice buzzed. It was Mark's voice. "It's warm. It's so warm. Mr. Thorne, bring them to the warmth." A sob broke out from the back of the group. I spun around. A girl, Emily, was pointing toward the fiction stacks. Standing at the end of the aisle was a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs elongated like taffy. It wore Mark's varsity jacket, but the jacket was stretched to the breaking point. The creature had no face, just that vertical slit. It rushed us. It didn't run, it flowed, limbs snapping and reforming. I unleashed the fire extinguisher, a cloud of white chemical powder blinding the beast. It shrieked, a sound of grinding metal. "Run! The back exit!" I screamed. We scrambled through the maze of shelves. Books flew off the racks as if poltergeists were clearing a path behind us. We crashed through the emergency exit into the faculty corridor. This wing was older, the original stone of the 1920s structure. The walls were weeping. Actual water mixed with blood ran down the masonry. We needed to get to the main office. The only landline that might work was on Henderson's desk. Cell service had died the moment the code was called. We sprinted past the teacher's lounge. The door was ajar. Inside, the coffee pot was still steaming, but the room was painted in red. Not paint. The furniture was made of... I gagged. The furniture had been reupholstered with skin. We reached the atrium, the center of the school. The skylight above was buried in snow, casting a bruised purple light over the area. In the center of the atrium, where the school mascot statue usually stood, was a pulsating mass of flesh and wire. It was the heart of the school. Cables from the ceiling plugged into it, feeding it, and circling it were the shifters, the faceless things wearing the clothes of the football team. They stopped patrolling and looked at us. 10 of them. We were trapped on the balcony overlooking the atrium. "The music wing," I gasped. "Soundproofing. If we get to the recording studio, they can't hear us." We bolted toward the auditorium doors. The shifters screamed, a collective wail that shattered the glass of the trophy cases lining the walls. We were running on adrenaline and terror now. I could hear the wet slap of their feet behind us, gaining ground. We slammed through the auditorium doors, and I jammed a mop handle through the panic bars. The creatures slammed against the doors, the glass spiderwebbing but holding. The auditorium was vast and shadowed. The stage curtains were closed. But from behind the velvet, I could hear an orchestra tuning up. Discordant violins, out-of-tune cellos. But the instruments sounded like vocal cords being tightened. The curtain rose slowly. On stage, arranged in a choir riser, were the missing students. They were standing perfectly still, their eyes sewn shut with copper wire. They opened their mouths and sang a single deafening note that vibrated in our teeth. It wasn't music, it was a frequency, a summoning.
We ran down the aisle, heading for the band room backstage. The frequency made my nose bleed. I saw students collapsing, clutching their ears. I grabbed 2 of them by the collars and dragged them. We fell into the band room, slamming the heavy soundproof door. The silence was instant and painful. We were trapped. There was no way out. The band room had no windows, just the door and the vent. I looked at the vent. The grate was unscrewed. From the darkness of the ventilation shaft, a pale hand emerged. It had too many fingers. It beckoned to us. "Mr. Thorne?" A voice came from the vent. It was my mother's voice. She had been dead for 5 years. "Come inside, Eris. It's safe here." I looked at the students. 12 left, half the class gone. Their faces were masks of hopelessness. I gripped the fire extinguisher, my knuckles white. The door to the auditorium began to buckle. The choir was trying to break in. The vent offered a lie. The door offered death. "We fight," I said, knowing it was a lie, knowing we were just meat waiting to be processed by this digesting architecture. "Grab the instruments, anything sharp, cymbals, stands, drumsticks." The door splintered. The wood exploded inward. Light poured in, not the red emergency light, but a blinding, holy white light. Standing in the doorway was the principal. He looked normal, perfectly normal. He smiled, a warm, grandfatherly smile. "Code Obsidian is over, Mr. Thorne. You can bring the children out now. The drill is finished." For a second, I believed him. I lowered the extinguisher. The students began to weep with relief, stepping forward. Then I saw it. The principal's shadow. It didn't match his body. The shadow was a jagged, multi-limbed monstrosity stretching back into the auditorium, and beneath the hem of his pants, his feet were hovering an inch off the ground. "No!" I screamed, tackling the first student back. But it was too late. The principal's jaw unhinged, dropping to his chest, revealing rows of needle teeth spiraling down his throat like a fleshy sarlacc pit. The room dissolved. The floor became a tongue. The walls became teeth. We weren't in a school anymore. We were in the mouth of a god. As the darkness swallowed us, I realized the truth. The snow wasn't snow. It was ash. The world outside hadn't just ended. It had been eaten. We were just the last crumbs on the plate. I don't know if anyone will ever read this. I don't even know if the internet still exists outside of these brick walls, or if time is moving forward at all beyond the frosted glass of room 304. My name is Elias Thorne. I teach, or used to teach, AP European History at St. Jude's Preparatory Academy. It's been 3 days since the lockdown started. At least, I think it's been 3 days. My watch stopped at 10:14 a.m. on Tuesday, and the sky outside the window hasn't changed from that sickly, bruised purple hue since the alarm first blared. We all know the drill. We practice it twice a semester. The shrill, 3-tone chime, the voice of Principal Holloway, calm but firm. Code red, this is a lockdown. Teachers, secure your rooms. Students, move away from windows and doors. Remain silent. Usually, it's followed by the giggle of a nervous freshman or the groan of a senior interrupting their nap. But this time, there was no giggling. This time, the PA system didn't just chime, it shrieked. It was a sound like tearing metal, a feedback loop that made my molars vibrate, followed by a voice that sounded like Holloway, but wrong, wet, as if his throat was full of oil. "The protocol is active," the voice gurgled. "The shepherd is in the halls. Do not let him in. Do not let him in. Do not let him in." That was the first sign that this wasn't a drill. The second was the silence that followed. St. Jude's is an old building, a labyrinth of radiator pipes and settling wood. It breathes, it groans. But after that announcement, the school held its breath. The rain that had been lashing against the windows suddenly stopped, not tapered off, but ceased instantly, leaving a dead silence that pressed against our eardrums.
I have 22 students in my third period class. They are good kids. Sarah, the overachiever in the front row, immediately killed the lights. David and Marcus moved the heavy oak desk in front of the door with a surprising lack of noise. We huddled in the hard corner, the blind spot away from the door's narrow window. We sat on the cold linoleum, knees pulled to chests, waiting for the all clear or the rattle of a police officer checking the handle. We waited for hours. Around the 4-hour mark, the light shifting through the blinds turned that terrible shade of violet. I motioned for the students to stay put and crawled toward the window. I had to know. I peeked through the slats. There was no parking lot, no football field, no sleepy Connecticut town, just a swirling gray mist that extended into infinity, occasionally lit by flashes of silent lightning that revealed shapes, massive, impossible shapes moving in the fog. It looked like the school had been ripped from the earth and suspended in a void. I turned back to the kids, forcing a smile onto my face, but my shaking hands betrayed me. I told them the police were securing the perimeter. I lied. At the 6-hour mark, the door turned. It didn't rattle aggressively. It turned slowly, deliberately, all the way to the stop. Then it held there. We all held our breath. I saw Sarah squeeze her eyes shut, tears leaking out. The handle released, then turned again, slower this time. A soft, wet thud pressed against the wood from the other side, like a heavy, damp sponge hitting the door. Then a voice. It wasn't human. It was a mimicry of a child's voice, high-pitched but devoid of cadence. "Mr. Thorne, can I come in? I forgot my pencil." It was the voice of a student I had taught 10 years ago, a boy who had died in a car accident. I felt the blood drain from my face. The class stared at me, eyes wide with terror. They didn't recognize the voice, but they recognized the fear in me. "Mr. Thorne," the voice persisted, shifting now, deepening into a guttural growl. "Open the door, Elias. The shepherd wants to count the sheep." I put a finger to my lips, signaling absolute silence. The thing outside waited. I could hear it breathing, a wet, rattling aspiration that sounded like lungs filled with fluid. After an eternity, footsteps receded down the hall. But they didn't sound like shoes on tile. They sounded like hooves. Clack, squelch, clack, squelch. That was 2 days ago. Hunger is setting in now, but thirst is worse. The water fountains are in the hall, and the sink in the back of the room only dispenses a thick, rust-colored sludge that smells of copper. We are trapped in a single room, suspended in hell. Yesterday, we lost Marcus. He didn't leave the room. He was sitting right next to me. We had all dozed off in an exhaustion-fueled stupor. I woke up to a soft, tearing sound. I looked over, and Marcus was unraveling. That's the only word for it. He wasn't screaming. He was staring at his hand as his fingers dissolved into black smoke wafting up toward the ceiling tiles. He looked at me, his eyes full of confusion, and tried to speak, but his jaw unhinged and dissolved into ash. In seconds, he was gone. Just a pile of clothes and a shadow burned into the floor tiles where he had sat. The other students didn't wake up. I kicked the clothes under the radiator. I couldn't let them see. But I knew we couldn't stay here. The room was digesting us. St. Jude's wasn't protecting us. It was keeping us for later. I made a decision. I told the students we were moving to the cafeteria. It's industrial steel doors and a stockpile of food. It's on the ground floor, closer to the exits, if they still exist. They were terrified to leave the hard corner, but the thirst was winning. We prepared. We broke apart chair legs for weapons. I took the heavy brass fire extinguisher. We moved the desk. The sound of it scraping across the floor was deafening, echoing like a gunshot. I opened the door. The hallway was wrong. It was stretched. The lockers, usually a bright navy blue, were now a rusted, fleshy red, and they seemed to be breathing. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered with a rhythmic buzzing, like a heave of insects. The distance to the stairwell, usually 50 feet, looked to be a mile.
The perspective was forced, like looking through a fisheye lens. "Stay close. Do not look into the classrooms," I whispered. We moved in a phalanx. The air in the hallway was freezing, smelling of ozone and rotting meat. As we passed room 302, Mrs. Gable's English classroom, I violated my own rule. I looked. Mrs. Gable was there. She was standing at the chalkboard writing, but her arm was 10 feet long, segmented like a mantis, and she was writing the same sentence over and over in chalk that looked suspiciously like bone fragments. "Obedience is safety. Silence is gold." The students in her class were seated, but their heads were gone, replaced by smooth, featureless mounds of flesh. They sat perfectly still, hands folded on their desks. I choked back a scream and pushed my students faster. "Keep moving, eyes forward."
We reached the stairwell. The stairs didn't go down. They went around, a spiral of concrete that seemed to twist into a dark abyss. We had no choice. We descended. The walls of the stairwell were covered in graffiti, but the words were moving. Scrawled messages like, "The bell will not ring," and "Teacher, teacher, what have you learned?" On the second floor landing, we encountered the janitor, or what used to be Mr. Henderson. He was fused to the floor buffer. His torso emerged from the machine's chassis, his skin stretched taut over metal gears. He was spinning in circles, the buffer pads grinding against the concrete, scrubbing a stain that looked like a human face. He saw us. His eyes were headlights. "Hall pass," he screeched, the voice grinding like gears stripping. "Where is your hall pass?" He lunged, the machine whirring. I sprayed the fire extinguisher into his face, the chemical cloud blinding him. He shrieked, a sound of twisting metal, and crashed into the wall. We ran. We scrambled down the stairs, slipping on slick, unidentifiable fluids. We made it to the ground floor. The layout was chaotic. The trophy case was filled not with cups and medals, but with preserved organs in jars. Hearts, lungs, eyes. Each jar labeled with a student's name. I saw a jar labeled Marcus. My heart hammered against my ribs. The cafeteria was ahead. The double doors were barred from the outside with heavy chains. Someone had tried to keep something in. "Mr. Thorne," Sarah whispered, tugging my sleeve. "Look." She pointed down the main corridor toward the administrative offices. Standing at the end of the hall, silhouetted by the purple light streaming from the main entrance, was the shepherd. It was tall, impossibly tall. Its head scraped the 12-foot ceiling. It wore a tattered suit that looked like the school uniform but magnified. Its limbs were too long, possessing too many joints. It had no face, just a smooth white surface with a single vertical slit that pulsed. It was dragging something behind it, a chain of backpacks, dozens of them. It hadn't seen us yet. "Into the library," I hissed. The library was closer. We dove through the double doors just as the creature turned its head. I locked the door, jamming a chair under the handle. The library was a cathedral of silence. The shelves towered 30 feet high, reaching into darkness. But the books were breathing. I pulled one off the shelf. The cover was warm, leathery skin. The title was stamped in gold, "The History of Elias Thorne's Failures." I dropped it in horror. We are hiding in the archives now, in the back. There are no windows here, but we can hear. We can hear the shepherd patrolling the library. We can hear it pulling books off the shelves and reading them aloud. It's just read Sarah's future. It described her death in gruesome detail. She's sobbing silently into her sweater. I found a computer terminal that still works. It's an old chunky monitor, glowing green. It's not connected to the internet, but to an internal network called the curriculum. I'm typing this into a text file, hoping it saves somewhere, hoping someone finds the server logs of this hell. I've realized the truth. The lockdown isn't to keep a shooter out.
It's to keep the harvest in. The school is an incubator. We are the livestock. And the bell is about to ring. The door to the archives is shaking. Dust is falling from the ceiling. The shepherd has found us. It knows I'm writing this. The handle is turning. It's not a drill. It never was. I'm going to grab the fire extinguisher. I'm going to stand in front of my students. If this is the end of the lesson, I'm going to make sure it's one hell of a final exam. The door is opening. There is so much light. It burns. Class dismissed.